Hello. Welcome to Office Hour. It has been a couple of weeks since I've gone live. School has started, and obviously, my first and foremost priority is to be a professor. That means I am managing teaching duties, research duties, and service commitments to my department, to the university, and to the college. But we're back, and hopefully, everyone was able to tune in to the replays of the videos about the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program, for which applications are due in about 3 weeks. And also the replay of general tips for applying for graduate school. Welcome once again to Under the Hood. This is a place for STEM folks, aspiring, current, retired students on the professional side, so staff and faculty. And this is where we can talk about some of the behind the scenes experiences in regard to careers in STEM. Particularly, we want to focus on the experiences of those with intersecting marginalized identities. Some of our issues are not always on the forefront of conversations about preparing for academic jobs and so forth, or the advice is usually given behind closed doors, it's not public, and it may not be readily accessible to people who are not in special circles of advocates. As a disclaimer, if you have a Title IX concern, please take that up with a qualified individual at your institution. None of the views that I express on this channel are those of my previous or current institutions. So let's get started. Today, I just wanted to go through a few of the frequently asked questions that I get as a faculty member about careers. There's no special presentation planned, and I just want to talk and keep it pretty casual. So I'll start with the question around how do you choose whether to go into academia, industry, or take a government job? So I get that a lot. Fortunately, and maybe unfortunately, I was able to take several internships across all sectors. I've worked for county government. I have worked for private industry. I've worked for a private consulting firm. And obviously, I've done research. So I'm going to tell you what worked for me. In my county government job, it was unpaid because this was around the time of the Great Recession when employment was at an all-time low. So I worked for Glenn County Engineering Services in Southeast Georgia. I thought it was a great experience. It was unpaid. I desperately needed the work experience on my resume, but I was fortunate enough to have a little bit of savings. And also Southeast Georgia is pretty affordable. And at the time, this was around 2009. And what I found in the government position is that we were pretty much bound by what the permitting responsibilities were, what the prescribed tasks were as an engineering intern or as a county engineer. So there wasn't a whole lot of room for creativity, for riffing, or for exploring any original ideas, entrepreneurship, etc. So while I did appreciate the experience, I recognized that I was looking for something a little bit more fast-paced and something that allowed for a little more creativity. Then fast forward, I had an internship at a huge private company, right? I worked for an oil company as an environmental engineering intern. So the perks of working in industry is that the pay is a little bit higher. If you are specialized in engineering, and obviously the various different engineering sectors are going to have different pay levels, right? We all know the hierarchies. The highest paid engineers are sometimes chemical, mechanical, and electrical, depending on the field. So right now, vehicle autonomy, obviously the companies that are in big tech are going to pay pretty high right now, as opposed to companies that are doing basic research or perhaps research in more older engineering specialties. And so more modern engineering is related to, computers, networks, robots, autonomy, as opposed to the more traditional engineering, mechanics, and fundamentals and things like that. So going back to my experience, I found that the pay was good and the hours were okay. I worked 4 10s, meaning I worked 4 days a week, 10 hours a day. So although the work wasn't as slow as government, it was still very prescribed. As a support environmental engineer, it was my job to implement work that supported permitting activities for the plant. It didn't allow a whole lot of creativity, but it was faster paced than my government job. Ultimately, I thought that the ethos of drilling, oil, and refining was kind of against my core values. So I decided to go back to school. I was also fortunate enough to be able to intern at a private consulting firm. It was a small business, and I will link the interview of my boss, Miss Kim Aji. So I worked for River to Tap, and that was an awesome experience. And if I weren't already on track to go back to get a PhD, I would try and see if I can get more permanent employment in their small business firm. I enjoyed working on different projects, billing my time to various projects. We got to go into the field and do storm water and water quality sampling around the Atlanta area. And things that I took for granted, like the stream systems and where the manholes were, it really didn't occur to me until I worked at the consulting firm, how intricate these networks are, in the urban setting. So that was fun. Working for a small consulting firm, it felt like family. And it's coming to me now that the company holiday parties were my favorite, my favorite part. And they were always really nice. It was black tie. And so, but ultimately, I knew that I wanted to explore a terminal degree in my field, which was PhD. I felt that the PhD in environmental engineering would open up more job opportunities, and it did. And so, what types of opportunities can you get as a PhD, right? Honestly, you could go into consulting, you could go into government, and you can also go into industry with a PhD. You can enter in at a higher pay grade as well. So the pay grades for federal government are named GS numeral, right? So from what I understand, a PhD can enter in at a pretty high pay grade in the federal government, depending on what organization you work for. Also, as a PhD, you can get hired at consulting firms that require technical expertise. So, for example, for my environmental folks, On the air side, you can work for Ramball. Perhaps on the water side, you can work for AECOM or Jacobs. I know Exponent is also a company that hires PhDs in environmental engineering. And I think people can start with a pretty decent salary. For those that want to apply their engineering skills, let's say they're an engineer, this is specifically for engineering, because I know that engineers with a PhD oftentimes get hired in consulting firms, in business consulting firms. So I have not personally worked in those companies, but from what I know, they pay really well, but perhaps the hours are long, particularly if it's a traveling consulting position. So the companies that you could work for in business consulting include Deloitte, Bain and Company, McKinsey, right? Those are the companies that I know most of the professional engineering degree holders shoot for. Okay, so some other places that PhDs in STEM could work, particularly engineers, are national labs. I will link here a little bit later, the interview of my colleague, Dr. Jeremy Feaster, who works at, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, to get an idea of what the day in the life of a PhD holder in a national lab looks like. All right. One other thing that I want to talk about now is academia. Obviously, academia is my neck of the woods. And so I'm going to go more in depth about some of the frequently asked questions when it comes to faculty positions. And I'm also going to link a little bit later a card here that points you all to my 7-part series that explains the behind the scenes and the nuances of securing a faculty position. I talk about evaluating whether the position is a right fit for you. I talk about best practices for the written materials, for a screening interview, and for a full interview. Then I also give tips for ramping up and negotiating. So I think I know I've gone through 2 hires in the last 4 years, and both hirings were unique. I've interviewed 3 times, and so I just pulled together the advices that I thought would be helpful to someone that may not have access to preparatory training programs, but you can get my perspective. I recommend to take into account advice from multiple perspectives. I understand that you may not have access, but if you are at an academic institution and you do have access to faculty members that you feel comfortable asking questions to, do so. Also, attend any seminars that are meant to prepare people for faculty. That's also pretty helpful if you're looking for a faculty position. Now, shout out to you know who you are for bringing some of these questions to the forefront of my mind. I recognize that I may not have discussed this or on this channel yet. So some of the nuanced, frequently asked questions I get about academia are the following. So what is a tenure clock? So the tenure clock is jargon for the time period spent before you get promoted from assistant to associate professor. So most pre-tenure clocks are about 6 to 8 years. Okay. And that's just what we call it. Other questions that I may get, getting letters of recommendation. So, especially for my folks with marginalized identities that may not have a great relationship with their advisor, how do you go about getting a letter of recommendation when that relationship isn't there? Um, you may want to talk to the diversity, equity, and inclusion representative on your campus about how to navigate who you can get letter writers, get to write your letters. And also, if you have co-authored papers with people in your field, they may also be willing to write a letter for you. If there are other faculty members in your department that don't mind advocating for you, they can also be letter writers. And if you happen to have a department chair or a dean at your institution who understands the nuances of being a person with intersecting marginalized identities, they can also write letters for you. So just get creative about, how to navigate an uneasy relationship with your advisor. You should always be cultivating relationships with people who share your same core values, share your vision, and that you just generally get along with. So if there's a faculty member that is doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work on campus, they're holding seminars, they're holding workshops, start to talk to them, start to develop your network and look outside of your immediate lab. And it's not to, try to, seek nefarious motives. It's just to talk to people and get varying advice about careers, all right? It's always good to spread out your mentorship. There has been concerns brought up to me about what does actual support look like when you have a marginalized intersecting identities, right? So my blanket answer for that is look for things that are tangible and quantifiable. So how many letters has this ally written for you? How many applications have they supported? How often do they meet with you? How long do you talk to them? How many fellowships have they helped you apply for? All right. Allies and people that are supposed to support you are supposed to guide you toward tangible resources that help you advance in your career. Fellowships, job opportunities, letters of recommendation, advocacy when there's a conflict. It's not enough to just say that someone cares about your success. That needs to be translated into quantifiable action. If it's not translatable to quantifiable action, I'd say it's performative support. The other thing I want to talk about is the concept of in academia of having an ally versus having a champion. I think it's important to distinguish these two. In my mind, an ally is someone that you can talk to as a liaison or a go-between between you and the system that you're seeking to better understand, right? So an ally is deep within the system. They have assumed privilege either through seniority or their identity or their connections, and they can give you the behind the scenes information about how to navigate a system. So even though I might not be at your institution, you can consider me an ally because I'm trying to help you navigate a seemingly unnavigable environment. On the other hand, a champion is someone who will, quote unquote, move mountains for you when you're not in the room. They're providing structural support in the form of resources, job opportunities, fellowships, monies, space as an academic when you're not there. They're advocating for you when you're not in the room. They are advocating to get more resources toward your academic career, especially in an environment that it could be hostile toward you. That's a champion, right? Allyship can be a little bit passive and it could be a little bit lip service, but it's still helpful to have someone to talk to you and tell you about unforeseen barriers, fill in knowledge gaps. But your champion is going to move your application forward. A champion is going to be in a room of people that are maybe against you, but they will convince the entire room to move to support you. That's a champion. I'm going to link here my interview with one of my champions, Dean Sharon Walker, who has put forth tangible resources for my career. The other thing that I want to talk about is how to find your champions, right? One thing that I noticed that a champion is able to do is that they can clearly articulate how they've helped people in the past. They can assign numbers. They can give you long narratives about the people who they've supported and helped, right? So that's another litmus test to see who is supporting people performatively versus quantifiably, right? So the hallmark of a good mentor and a good champion and a good ally is they can speak at length about how they're seeking to help people that may need additional support. Okay, I got another frequently asked question recently about the two-body problem in academia. So what's a two-body problem? Essentially, a two-body problem occurs when one person is seeking a faculty position and they make it to the final round and perhaps they're the desired candidate for hire, but they have a spouse that is, or a life partner who is also an academic. The two-body problem occurs when both of them need security of employment, but there is really only one person interviewing. So the problem comes with how do we employ the spouse? Most departments want to retain their preferred hire, so they will make concessions to make sure that the spouse or the partner has security of employment. And that security of employment can manifest in multiple ways. It can manifest in a 1 to 2 year research position, or there could be a faculty position filled that meets the needs of the department. So that's the two-body problem. Another thing, teaching. I'm going to talk a little bit about teaching. There is a hierarchy of teaching difficulty, and this is just my opinion. When you are seeking a faculty position and you're interviewing and they ask you what kind of teaching that you could contribute to the department, there is a hierarchy of difficulty. In my experience, and we're going to go from least to most difficult. The least difficult course, and I'm going to go in order of least difficult, high impact. So one of the least difficult, high impact courses you can teach is a graduate course in your specialty. Now, this could be a course that's already in the course catalog, or one that you can develop and get submitted to the committee for graduate studies or the committee on curricula, and it gets approved through the campus committees, and then it gets entered into the campus catalog. This is going to be your bread and butter, and it should be easiest to develop material for a graduate course like this, but it's also high impact, right? You're teaching something of high value to the department and to the students. Then I'd say the next course that is a little bit more difficult in terms of enrollment, because you can get a variety of majors, is the upper division technical elective. A technical elective is usually for undergraduates, but it's in a specialty area. But it tends to be on the small to medium size in enrollment. And by small, I mean 30 students. And by medium, I mean up to 70 students. These technical electives can also be in your subject area, but they also may be a part of the program accreditation. So there may be additional work involved with making sure you're meeting the marks for accreditation, but at least it's in your subject area and the enrollment is manageable. Next on the list, I would say, in terms of, it's a little bit more difficult. It's probably the same difficulty as the undergrad course, but maybe not as much work, is a large seminar class, right? Where you're scheduling, I would say this is not that difficult, but it's not your preferred class because a seminar is not a high impact class, right? So a 1-hour seminar where you're bringing in lecturers, you're doing an intro class, the class could be 100 to 200 students. So the work comes in managing all those students and building the schedule. But you're dedicating time, but you may not get a whole lot of teaching credit from this, right? So I would say this is the third in priority for teaching a course as a pre-tenured faculty. So I would veer away from these because you want to do high impact teaching to show that you have teaching proficiency. And this is for like an R1 high research output university. Last but not least are your core courses, upper division or lower division undergraduate courses. These are going to be what are normally referred to as weed out courses or starter courses. These are traditionally the most difficult to teach. They have higher enrollment and it's a lot of work. So these are going to be your fundamentals of mechanical engineering and fundamentals of environmental engineering, thermodynamics, mass transfer, heat transfer. These are definitely going to be courses that are a part of the program's accreditation. You're definitely going to get students in the class that may struggle because it's their first engineering course. It's going to be high enrollment because everyone in the department has to take it. So of all those types of courses that I talked about, if you are able to, make sure that you start out with your graduate courses that are in your area if you can. Then move on to a technical elective. Oh, and I forgot labs, right? A course that's heavy on the laboratory, where there may be more laboratory component than teaching component, because usually the labs are going to be run by the TAs in my experience. However, if it's a core course with a lab component, it's still a lot of work because everyone has to teach it, like a intro to chem, organic chemistry. So while you may be responsible for a huge 1,000 seat chemistry class, you may have TA support. But I do not recommend that someone who is just starting teach a 1,000-seater class, because the dynamics of managing that many students is a job in itself. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about is how we are hired and our contracts. So most faculty members, we are salaried, but only 8 to 9 months of our salary, and this is for STEM. This does not apply to like public health or medicine. About 8 to 9 months of our salary is covered. That's what the institution will pay for. The other 3 to 4 months you can supplement with external grants. But usually how you're paid out is that they split the 9-month rate over 12 months so that you can have security of a check every month. So how that ends up working is that your summer checks are a little bit higher because it includes your regular 9-month pay split over 9 or 8-month pay split over 12 months, but you also get your summer allotment. Once again, going back to my faculty position series, I also have heard recently about how many applications people should be applying to when it comes to faculty positions. Honestly, I just think it's impossible to craft a tailored application to more than 10 schools at a time. Some people can correct me if I'm wrong, and you can put it in the chat whether or not I'm incorrect. But to adequately really understand what the department needs are, what the department courses are, who does what research across the department, understanding the campus mission, understanding the campus policies for DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, takes a little bit of time to do, and it takes time to do that reconnaissance. So I'd say 10 to 12 applications in one cycle is on the high end. And if you're not able to tailor those applications to what that department is looking for, then it may not be a great use of your time. I also got a question about the balance between research and service. So right now, research and service is, traditionally is seen as separate. They're weighted differently when you're being evaluated for tenure. Of late, at least at my institution, they are now considering community-based research, public-facing research, participatory research in STEM. They're transitioning from seeing that as service to evaluating the outputs of that difference. At my institution, in order for service work or work that was previously considered service, in order for that to be considered a research credit, there has to be a specified output from the work. Some of those outputs that are respected as research include a journal article, a technical report, a policy memo, or a change in the way procedures and policies are done, either at the government level, at the institutional level, what have you. For example, say you are an engineer and you want to deploy rapid technology or smart technology in a community, in an underserved community. Back in the day, that would have been considered service. But what if the data you're collecting is bidirectional and the things that the community are learning from you are just as important as the things that you're learning from community, and the things that you're learning could inform policy? And as a result of you going out and distributing your equipment and sensors and smart gadgets amongst community members, you write a policy memo or you write a study that summarizes your pilot work, and then that gets picked up by the state legislature as the support for a new law. So you got a tangible output from that, and you've affected policy. So that is considered scholarly output, where your seemingly service-based work actually contributed to highly citable research and important scholarly outputs for the field. Okay. The other thing that I want to talk about is when you're looking for faculty positions, about what departments to consider. Nowadays, we may be tempted to apply to departments that are not our core degree, right? So you may be a mechanical engineer who is interested in a civil engineering faculty call because the research is similar. But the key thing to make sure when you're applying to departments that are outside of your core degree, you got to make sure that you can contribute to the teaching of the core courses in the department. This can make your application stronger. So if you are a mechanical engineer applying for civil, make it clear that you can cover mechanics of materials in the department. You can cover perhaps, I don't know what your research was, maybe, but talk about the core courses that you can cover, those core undergraduate courses. Even though those are the undesirable courses, you should be able to teach the majority of courses in the department if needed. For example, I am an environmental engineering PhD, previously hired in a chemical and environmental engineering department. I ended up teaching 2 core undergraduate chemical engineering courses. Thanks to my mechanical engineering thermodynamics course and my time at the oil and gas refinery, I had enough core knowledge to teach those courses, right? So that can also make your application stand out. The other thing is, for those of you that have intersecting marginalized identities and you may not have an advocate or a mentor or an ally readily available to you, I have found that using a weight of evidence approach is helpful to self-advocate and self-navigate. For instance, you might be in a peculiar situation where you don't really have a strong mentor relationship with anybody in your unit, right? Start paying close attention to what your colleagues before you are doing, how successful they are, and the steps that they're taking. And weight the evidence that you see more highly weighted to people that share your background and share your experiences to self-guide yourself, right? These are situations for which you just don't have access to the mentorship that you need and deserve. Although I had mentorship, I always look at what people are doing who are achieving what I want to achieve in the future, right? Look at the achievements they're making and in the time that they're making it, and gauge the milestones by observing others. And this is a weight of evidence approach. You can weight the observations that you see from other people. Also, most academics have their CVs online and accessible to everybody else. Go look at people's CVs. See when they got their career versus when they got hired. Did they get the NSF career grant in 2 years, in 3 years, based on their field? Did they enter into the position with a K-99 that rolled over into an ROO? This is an NIH traineeship grant for early career researchers. And then you can begin to build your own benchmarks, because what I can tell you is that even if you don't hear directly from that person, you can draw conclusions from several disparate experiences about what it takes to be successful when you don't have direct access to a coach. That's the same thing with writing papers. So for those of you that are on the tenure track and we know papers are important, look at who's getting hired and how many papers they have. Look at the frequency with which they publish for their specific field, look at the journals they're publishing in, and look at their Google Scholar. Look at how many citations they're getting. Use a weight of evidence approach to see what the general average trend is for publishing and the timing of publishing for your field. So this becomes important when you're trying to evaluate your faculty prospects. If you're a laboratory research person, if you're a field research person, or if you're an in silico or modeler, right? Each one of these types of research has different paces. And the paces in these disciplines is also different. So be sure to do an apples to apples comparison and self-motivate to publish. If you are not communicating directly with your advisor about how often to publish, and if they have a whole lot of students and you're not getting a whole lot of one-on-one advice, develop your writing plan based on the benchmarks that you see established by people that are at the same career level as you. Okay? So pay attention to what other people are doing. Okay, I think this is all I'm going to talk about for today. I think in the future I may do a planned Q&A event via Zoom. I have some travel coming up, so next week I may live stream from my conference. That should be exciting. And it's that time of the year when applications are starting to be due, papers need to get published, and we're in the mad fall rush. So I wish everyone a safe weekend. Make sure to do some restorative activities if you've had a long week. And be sure to use the link to my Google form to ask any questions that you may have. And I will be sure to keep you anonymous. All right. This has been Friday Office Hour, and I will hopefully see you live next week.